Nir, like I said, I'm very excited for this conversation. This is a topic, and when I say a topic, the topic of being indistractable, the phrase that you so elegantly have termed. And this idea, this concept is very near and dear to my heart because I personally have been in this space of helping people unlock some level of focus in their lives. And actually, it goes back, oh my God, this journey actually goes back 10 years. When I first left Google, one of the first things I did was I realized how much time people are wasting and reacting to their inbox. And I created a program called Effortless Email to help people sort of organize, systematize, but really the root of it was how do we get them to be a little bit more conscious? How do we get them to be a little bit more present as they're going about the process of answering and organizing emails? And so I love this topic because I think that when you really observe the root of especially the entrepreneurial journey, the difference between somebody who can take control of their time, their calendar, and as a result, their priorities, the difference between someone who does and someone who doesn't is like one order of magnitude. I mean, we're talking about someone who makes millions of dollars and creates a massive level of impact versus someone who does nothing. So it's actually devastating, the problem that you're addressing and that you've like been able to create this beautiful system around. So first of all, it's just gratitude. Like, thank you, because I'm doing everything that you teach and it's made a massive difference in my life.
Oh man, that's like catnip for an author. There's nothing better than hearing that. Really, I love it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I didn't write the book for my readers. I wrote the book for me. But to hear that other people benefit from it is amazing. I mean, I really started this journey not thinking, oh, I'm going to write a best-selling book. I started from, I'm really struggling here, right? That's why I write books, is not because I am looking, because I have the answer. That's no fun. That's not interesting to me. It's because I'm looking for the answer. That's why I write these books. And I was really struggling with distraction, especially when I had started to get some amount of professional success and I started having more demands on my time. I started getting consulting engagements and speaking gigs, and more and more things were falling into my lap. And that's when I found that I couldn't keep doing the things I needed to do to maintain my success, let alone taking care of my body, right? I would say I was going to exercise, but I didn't. I said I was going to eat right, but I wouldn't. I would be with my family members and find myself, with my beautiful daughter. And somehow, as opposed to being fully present with her, I'd be checking something stupid on my phone as opposed to really, enjoying that moment. So that's when I decided I really had to figure out the deeper psychology of why we get distracted.
Well, you are phenomenal with the psychological aspects of all of this. You clearly have gone to great lengths to uncover what's really going on, what are the patterns, and then to put language to them, which I believe the most important thing is when we find that pattern, these things can be very elusive. Oftentimes the topics even are very esoteric. And so bringing sort of just basic mainstream language to these things that we do and why we do them is very, very important. And you've done this in both of your books and phenomenally well.
Thanks.
Now, on the topic of distraction and the topic of your system of sort of hedging against that, can you give just a big picture sort of outline of what the system looks like? How would you describe the methodology?
Yeah. Absolutely. And to reemphasize the point, this is really a macro skill that, you're absolutely right that if you cannot sustain your attention, if you can't control your time, then how do you acquire new skills? How do you make breakthrough innovation? How do you become your best self? You can't. I mean, there's no area of your life, your physical health, your psychological health, your business life, your personal life, every area of your life requires you to be able to control your attention, is truly how we choose our life. So that's why this is such an important area. And to start, a good place to begin is to really understand what is distraction. It's one of these terms that we kind of throw around, but I didn't really understand what the word really meant. And so the best way to understand if you really know a term is to ask yourself if you know the antonym. Can you name the opposite of that word? So when you ask most people, what's the opposite of distraction? They'll tell you it's focus, right? That makes sense. The opposite of distraction is focus, but that's not true. That if you look at the origin of the word, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction is traction. That both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull. And you'll also notice that traction and distraction both end in the same 6 letters, ACTION, that spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us. It is an action that we take. So traction, by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that you do with intent, things that move you closer to your values and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction is distraction. Distraction is any action that pulls you further away from what you said you were going to do, further away from your goals, further away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. So this is not just semantics. This is super important because I would argue any action can be traction or distraction based on one word. And that one word is intent. So just because an action is, work related doesn't mean it can't become a distraction. Let me give you a perfect example. Every day for years, I would sit down at my desk and I'd say, okay, I've got that big thing I need to work on right now. I'm not going to procrastinate anymore. I'm going to get started. Nothing's going to get in my way. Here I go right now. But first, let me check some email, right? Let me work on those easy tasks on my to-do list real quick, just to get some momentum going, right? They're work-related tasks. I'm being productive, right? And what I didn't realize is that is the most dangerous form of distraction. The distractions that trick you into prioritizing the easy and the urgent at the expense of the hard and important work we have to do to move our lives and careers forward. Yes. So just because it's a work-related task doesn't mean it's not a distraction. If it's not what you said you were going to do with your time, it is by definition a distraction. And conversely, anything can be traction, right? So these days you hear a lot of these chicken little tech critics telling you technology is hijacking your brain. Stop checking social media. You're going to get addicted. Shut up. It's ridiculous. It's totally nonsense. Anything you want to do with your time, let's not morally, people love to moralize and medicalize. We love to tell people that, oh, you checking Facebook, that's bad. But, me watching a football game, that's all right.
Sure, exactly.
What's the difference? Anything you want to do with your time. You want to watch YouTube videos? Do it. You want to watch Netflix? Great. You want to go on social media? Wonderful. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your time. What I want you to do is to do whatever it is you want to do with your time. So if you want to do those things, you want to play a video game, scroll social media, wonderful. But do it on your schedule and according to your values, not someone else's. The time you plan to waste is not wasted time.
Is that really the intent piece? Yeah.
Exactly. And deciding in advance, because here's the thing. So we've got traction and we've got distraction. Now we have to ask what prompts us to these actions, right? Why do we take these actions? So there are two types of triggers. We have what we call external triggers. These are the usual suspects, the pings, the dings, the rings, everything in our outside environment that can lead us towards distraction. But studies find that that's only 10% of the time we get distracted. So even though people say, oh, I was going to work on this big project, but then I got some kind of notification or something, my phone rang, that's only 10% of the reason. So what's the other 90%? Studies find the other 90% of the time we get distracted. It's not because of what's happening outside of us. It's about what's happening inside of us. These are called internal triggers. Boredom, loneliness, fatigue, stress, anxiety, uncertainty. Turns out that this is overwhelmingly the triggers that move us towards distraction are these uncomfortable emotional states, which is why it's so important. One of my key revelations in this journey to writing Indistractable was this, that time management is pain management. Time management is pain management. If you can't master these internal triggers, they become your master. Because whether it's too much news, too much booze, too much food, too much Facebook, too much football, it doesn't matter. You're going to find an escape from whatever uncomfortable sensation you're dealing with unless you know how to master it. So now to answer your question, what's the basic framework? We start with these internal triggers, right? How do we master these internal triggers so that they don't become our master? That's the most important step. None of the other techniques work. None of the life hacks you hear about or gurus tips, none of that stuff works unless you know how to master the internal triggers. So that's step number one. Step number two is making time for traction, right? Is actually planning out our time, that you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from, right? Like I would meet with many, many people who say, oh, I'm so distracted. I can't get this done. And all this stuff is happening. And when you say, okay, but let me see your calendar. What did you plan to do? What did you get distracted from? Oh, I didn't really plan my time. Well, then how can you say you got distracted? The third step is to hack back those external triggers. So this is where we get really practical and to all those pings and dings, of course, on your phone, your computer. But what about all these other external triggers? Like many of us work from home. Our kids can be a huge source of distraction. Our roommates, our spouses, all these things can be potential external triggers. We have to hack back each and every one of them. I'll show you how to do that. It's actually pretty easy to do. And the last step is to prevent distraction with pacts, which is where we use what's called a pre-commitment device to make sure that as a last line of defense, we don't get distracted. So it's really about these 4 strategies in concert. This is how we become indistractable.
Nir, you're the real fucking deal. I can't even begin to tell you how much I mean that. There are so many people that are obsessed with this topic, just like me, for one reason or another. And some of them share their journey as I have, as they're uncovering the right tools, the right education, the right methodologies. And there are so many people that have attempted to write the book that you've written, and they don't get to the root of the matter. They are just providing these life hacks, as you called them, these little surface level Band-Aid solutions to become 10% more productive. This whole, and don't get me wrong, I love the idea of better productivity, higher productivity, being more effective with my time. I love all of these concepts. I love, yes, the 80-20 rule and all of these things. But ultimately, none of them are hitting at what you're talking about. This is massively an internal game. Essentially. Like you're talking about human emotions that are hardwired since childhood that many of us are completely unaware of. In many ways, and I hate to stretch it too far, but this is almost like a little bit of therapy on the self that is necessary to understand, why am I reacting like that every time it's time to write my book? Why do I go and feel better about clicking around in a spreadsheet when I know in reality what I should be doing? Why won't I even take the time to set the intent for my day? Or it just goes on and on and on. How did you get to the root of this? How did you get to the root of the matter?
Well, I first of all, I really appreciate that you see the depth here, because to me, it's I was just so sick of trying all these tips and techniques. Whenever I have a problem in my life, first I try and figure it out on my own. If I can't come to the conclusion, maybe I'll talk to a good friend about it. If I still can't figure it out, then I'll read some books about it. And that's what I did with this topic of distraction. And all the books basically said the same thing. Turn off your technology, right? Throw away Facebook, go on a digital detox. Right. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I would still, say I was going to work on a big project, and yet, oh, look, there's that book on the bookshelf that I've been meaning to read. Or, boy, my desk is a mess here. Let me clean it up real quick. Or, oh, the laundry really needs to get done right now. Look, distraction has been with us forever, right? Plato, the Greek philosopher, talked about this 2,500 years ago. 2,500 years before Facebook and the internet and your iPhone, people were still getting distracted. Yes. So it can't be something new. It can't be just because of these technologies. There's something deeper going on. So what I wanted to do is to really start with a deeper question of not just why do we get distracted, but why do we do anything and everything, right? What's the seat of human motivation? And it turns out that the vast majority of us don't really understand what motivation is about. That most people, if you ask them how do you motivate yourself or someone else, they'll give you some version of carrots and sticks, right? Pain and pleasure. That Sigmund Freud said this, Jeremy Bentham said this. This is an age-old concept, this idea that, we have these two masters of the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. Turns out, though, that neurologically, this is not true. That neurologically, motivation is not about pain and pleasure. Neurologically, motivation is about one thing and one thing only. Everything you do for one reason. And that is the desire to escape discomfort. Everything, even the pursuit of pleasure. Think about it. Wanting to feel good, craving, desire, lusting, these are psychologically destabilizing states. So even wanting pleasure is itself uncomfortable. So this is called the homeostatic response. And the best way to understand it is to think about it physiologically, right? When your body feels out of balance, right? Your brain tells your body to do something to restore that balance. So for example, if you go outside and it's cold, the brain says, hey, this is uncomfortable. You should put on a coat. If you come back inside, now you're too hot. The brain says, this doesn't feel good. Take your coat off. If you're hungry, you feel hunger pangs. So you eat. And if you eat too much, you feel stuffed. You stop eating. So makes perfect sense physiologically. Of course, the same carries over psychologically. So if you're lonely, check Facebook. If you're uncertain, you Google. If you're bored, lots of solutions to boredom, right? We can look at Reddit, stock prices, sports scores. Oh, let's check the news so we can worry about somebody's problem 5,000 miles away as opposed to having to look at our own issues. right?
Ooh.
So all of these things, everything we do is fundamentally because of a desire to escape discomfort, which goes back to time management is pain management, which is why, your frustration, my frustration with all these, little tips and tricks and life hacks and give me the magic solution doesn't
Yeah.
work, because you know what? You got to look at the discomfort. You have to understand that distraction is always a desire to escape an uncomfortable emotion. But once you have the tools, once you have those arrows in your quiver, you don't necessarily have to go to therapy for this. All we have to do is use a few tactics and techniques to make sure that, when I feel that discomfort, I know what to do. You're not going to get me next time, because I know how to prevent that distraction from happening.
We almost have to first understand what it is we're looking for, right? Like what is that response? What is happening to me internally to look for? And then to almost essentially sounds like preemptively beat it to the punch by utilizing one of these tools. So what does that first step really look like to sort of beat ourselves before our sort of response system kicks into this autopilot that it's typically used to?
Yeah, so it's really about mastering those internal triggers. And again, this is one strategy out of four, right? So there are lots of tactics. Tactics are what you do. Strategy is why you do it. So it's, I'll give you the tactics, but I want folks to make sure you understand this is part of a model, right? It's about all four steps. You don't have to do everything I say in the book. That's fine. But you do have to do at least one thing in each of these four steps. And they're all easy. Like you can learn them in, less than an hour, right?
Got it.
But let's start with that first step of mastering internal triggers. So it starts by really understanding that, first and foremost, time management is pain management. And by recognizing that discomfort, that we have to disarm it in some way. How do we do that? We reimagine it, right? We can think about it differently. So reimagining the trigger as a positive thing as opposed to a negative thing. What we see, the difference between high performers and low performers, is that the low performers, they try and escape that discomfort, right? You feel bored, let me do something else. You feel stressed, let me escape. Let me take a drink. Let me, scroll a feed. Let me turn on the TV. Let me check email. Let me do anything I can to get out of that uncomfortable state. Partially because the self-help industry has fed us this bogus lie that feeling bad is bad.
Yeah.
Feeling bad is not bad, right? Like feeling bad is a very good thing. It can help us. It's evolutionarily beneficial. I mean, think about it, right? How many books these days do we hear with happiness in the title and people trying to teach us that, we have to be content and happy all the time? It's such an unrealistic, unnatural thing to say. I mean, think about it. If there was ever a tribe of people who magically all learned how to, bliss out and reach nirvana and be in perfect contentment and totally happy all the time, what do you think would have happened when our ancestors would have met those people? I'll tell you what happened. They would have killed and eaten them. Okay. Like it is not, like, you don't want a species to be happy all the time. Happy is evolutionarily designed to be a fleeting sensation, right? Why, by the way, it's very interesting. Why do we have pleasure in the first place? It's to create a memory to cause pain to go get us to pursue it again. That's the whole point of pleasure. It's not meant to be sustained. So what does that mean? It means that we can use that discomfort as rocket fuel to propel us forward. So what we see with these high performers, you see this with comedians, with athletes, with, business leaders, there's always that itch. They've got that history of somebody told them they couldn't do it. They've got something to prove. They've got some insecurity, and they use that as rocket fuel, as opposed to what most people do. They drink it away, they drug it away, they scroll it away, as opposed to harnessing it. So it really starts with reimagining that discomfort as, wait a minute, I can use this as something helpful. Now, I'll give you a very practical example that happened in my life. So, I was really passionate about these ideas, and I love sharing ideas. But for the longest time, I had terrible stage fright, right? I would, right before I would go on stage, I would get the sweaty palms, and I'd start even shaking sometimes, super nervous, butterflies in the stomach, everything. And I used to have a narrative in my head that told me that, you see, if you feel this way, it's because this isn't real, right? You must not be doing it right, or you're going to screw up. And I'd have this internal dialogue that was really harmful. And then I read this research literature about how we can reimagine those internal triggers. We can reimagine those uncomfortable internal states as something positive as opposed to something negative. And then I changed the conversation. And I would tell myself, you see, because my heart rate is racing right now, that's my body preparing me to give a great talk by sending more oxygen to my brain.
Mm.
So having that dialogue, you're working on a hard project and you say to yourself, wow, this is really hard. Well, good, it's hard. That means that other people won't do it and you will.
Yes.
So it's really about reimagining those internal triggers. That's one thing. There's also reimagining the task, reimagining your temperament. There's all kinds of techniques we can use. But that's one of the steps. There's about a dozen different things we can do. Happy to talk about more.
Oh, yes. It's funny you bring up that one about stage fright and getting nervous. I'd spent, all my life being this very extroverted person, loving to speak, getting in front of people, getting on stages. And then all of a sudden I went through the same thing and it came out of nowhere. And I remember talking to somebody about it. I said, I literally feel like I'm going to die the moment I'm about to get on that stage. I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack and I don't know where it's coming from. And I'm supposed to be good at this. He was a comedian. And he said, listen, we all go through waves of this. It was basically, he was getting close to what the methodology you've described, the tactic you've described. He was like, you have to reframe that from I'm nervous to I'm excited. And you have to overcompensate the energy. That energy's got to go somewhere, and you have to use it as fuel. Like you said, it's kind of coming up to me to give me the excitement and energy to actually speak and get this out. And it's incredible how much just one simple reframe of something that we thought was automatic, that we cannot change, changes your entire being, I would then go into these actually performing, I said performing, but speaking better than I ever had, because I actually tapped into a power that I didn't know was there in the first place when I was all Mr. Confident and comfortable. It's absolutely wild how complex we really are. Totally. And when you start to understand these things, how much more powerful you can become.
Absolutely. And how, we see that it's so prevalent today that these, I call them temperaments, that the temperaments are these fixed states that people put on themselves, that they call themselves one thing or another. And it's incredible how that can be something that can help us or hurt us. Yeah. So one of the studies I cite in the book has to do with what we call ego depletion. Ego depletion is this idea that willpower is a depletable resource. And you probably heard this in one degree or another, that, you feel spent. So I would come home from work and I'd say, what a hard day. I'm spent. Give me that pint of Ben & Jerry's. I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix because I have no more willpower, right? And many people still believe this idea that willpower is a depletable resource. We run out of willpower. And in fact, there were several studies done by one researcher that showed that this is true, that you run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And he made all kinds of, claims about, you can replenish it with lemonade and all kinds of stuff. And it turns out it was bogus. That now we know that, what happens in the social sciences when a study sounds too good to be true, we replicate the study, right? Sure. We run it again. And it's been over a decade now, and we've tried to rerun the study again and again and again in the social sciences. And it looks like, as far as we know, ego depletion is not real, that you don't run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank, except in one group of people. Carol Dweck, a researcher at Stanford, found that one group of people really do experience ego depletion. They really do run out of willpower, like, charging a battery or gas in a gas tank. And those people, and only those people, were people who believed that willpower was a limited resource.
Oh, you got to be kidding me.
So only those people.
You got to be kidding me.
And we see this all the time, right? This is what we see today all the time. That the media will tell us, technology is hijacking your brain. Well, of course it is, if you believe it is, right? It leads to learned helplessness. Learned helplessess is when we believe something is not worth trying, so we don't even start.
And so, of course, if you believe you're powerless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
And so we see this, people say, I'm not a morning person. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm a this, I'm a that. I'm bad at time management. Well, maybe, but if you believe you are, then you absolutely are.
Well, I wonder what that really says at a deeper level then. It's so fascinating to me. So if willpower is a essentially unlimited resource, there is absolutely no depletion that has to occur unless we believe so. That means we're basically superhuman. That means that if we put our minds to it, that if we have an identity of I have unlimited fuel, let's just call it, because I love that analogy. I have unlimited fuel, and if I align myself properly and I'm aware of and I set the proper intent and I have the scaffolding to be indistractable, I mean, the difference between that person and a person who believes their willpower is going to be depleted and they have no scaffolding and no system is like night and day, right?
Yeah.
What's
No,
what's
it
an
doesn't mean you won't
example?
get. Yeah, it doesn't mean you won't get tired of a task.
Sure.
Of course, we all have physical and psychological limitations. That's not what this is saying. It's saying what the research is pointing to, and this comes from Michael Inslich at the University of Toronto. He thinks that willpower is not a limited resource; it's an emotion, it's a
Yeah.
feeling. So just like we wouldn't say, "Oh, I was having a great time and then I ran out of happy," or I was mad at you and then I exhausted my anger. That doesn't work that way, right? Emotions aren't exhaustible, they're fleeting, right? That when we feel an emotion, it's like a wave. It crests and then it subsides. So that's a much healthier way to look at these at not only willpower but all of these internal triggers, is that they're transitory. And if we can learn to do what psychologists call surf the urge, ride out those sensations, we train ourselves to be able to not only absorb those to the utmost. So what tends to happen is people give up before they get started. They say, "Oh, I'm spent, I'm out," right? Like that's it. Or I'm a this, I'm a that, I'm a Sagittarius, I'm not a morning person, and they don't even try. As opposed to saying, look, you're not necessarily limited by these things. These are feelings. They're transitory. They come and go, and we can ride them to serve us as opposed to hurt us.
Well, I have a pivot I want to do here on because I actually have this question that's been boiling inside of me to ask you. But
Please.
I am curious. What is an example of something like a belief that you changed or a belief that somebody you worked with changed and kind of the result that you saw?
Yeah, so part of the reason that I have this lifelong fascination with behavior is that I used to be clinically obese. And yeah, it's tough. Like being obese is really hard. And what obese people will tell you, chronically obese. We're not, some people will gain
Yes.
weight or lose weight because of medical conditions or hormone imbalances, and that tends to be transitory. We tend to be able to fix that with medical science. But when it comes to long term, like when somebody is in the course of years and years gains weight and is not able to take it off, as I was, we don't eat. We're not obese because we're hungry a lot, right? We overdo things because of, again, these internal triggers. I didn't eat because I was hungry. I didn't eat because I would have loved to, and I used to blame the fast food industry. You see, the fast food industry, you make delicious food. How dare you? I want to eat your food all the time. Stop it.
Right,
Like,
right.
and don't get me wrong, like the industry does all kinds of shady practices. There's all
Totally
kinds
they
of things
do.
they could do better. But that wasn't really why I was overeating. I was overeating because I was eating my feelings, right? This is why we overeat, just like why we overconsume media or why we get distracted. I was, eating when I was bored. I was eating when I was lonely. I was eating when I felt guilty about overeating. And it wasn't until I saw myself differently. Like for a long time, I just said, well, I'm fat. I'm fat. It's who I am, right? It's my metabolism, or I was born this way. And look, there are characteristics. We know that there's certain traits when it comes to personality, even though now we're finding more and more that you can change those things. There are all kinds of things we can't change.
Yes.
But darn it, we need to figure out what is changeable and what is not changeable. And I would argue that far too many of us put labels on ourselves that make us believe that we are one way when we're not. I'll give you a great example. Last night, I was using social media, and I posted about distraction and all this stuff that we've been talking about. And somebody posted, "Hey, by talking about this, you're shaming people with ADHD. That you can't always control your attention." And certainly, look, some people really do have ADHD. Some people really do have this pathology and should seek medical attention. But that's not everybody, right?
Right.
How many of us say we have ADHD? We've never gone to a doctor. We've never had a diagnosis, right? We just struggle with distraction, as people have always struggled with distraction, right? So far too many of us, we put labels on ourselves. We call ourselves this, that, and the other, and it really doesn't serve us. As I used to do, saying, well, this is just who I am. I'm overweight. And by the way, I don't want to shame anybody. If you want that, if that's good for you, if you choose that lifestyle, fantastic. I didn't, right? I wasn't, I didn't feel like I was getting the most out of life by being trapped by a behavior I couldn't change. And so it wasn't until I freed myself to say, look, it's not anybody's fault. I didn't want to blame anybody else or shame myself. This is a really important point. When it comes to distraction in life, any form of distraction, doing anything that's not what we intend to do, anything that we'll later regret, people tend to fall into two categories. We call them blamers or shamers, right? The blamers, they blame things outside themselves. Yes. Internet, you're what distracted me. Facebook, you did this to me, right? They blame things outside themselves. McDonald's, you're the reason that I'm overweight, right? They blame things outside themselves. Then you have what we call the shamers. The shamers, this is what I used to do, they take it on the inside, right? I must be bad. I must be broken. There's something wrong with me, right? They shame themselves, which is also not helpful, because what do we do when we feel shame? Shame is a very powerful, uncomfortable internal state. It's one of these internal triggers we hate to feel. So what do people do when they feel shame? They're more likely to look for more distraction to take their mind off of that discomfort of shame. So it just leads to this vicious cycle, which I was trapped in. So it wasn't until I learned, look, don't be a blamer, don't be a shamer, be what's called a claimer. A claimer claims responsibility not for how they feel. This is incredibly liberating. You cannot control your feelings. Your feelings and your thoughts, you can't control them. They're fleeting, right? It doesn't mean anything if you feel or think a certain way. You don't have to listen to every thought in your head. These things come and go, right? What you can control is how you respond to those feelings, hence the word responsibility, right? So think about, for example, the urge to sneeze. You can't control the urge to sneeze. Once you feel the urge to sneeze, you've felt it already. What you can do is decide what you're going to do. Are you going to sneeze all over everyone, or do you take out a handkerchief and cover your face? Right? So it's all about how you respond to that urge. Will you respond to that discomfort, that internal trigger, by looking for escape, by trying to not feel it with one distraction or another? Or do you use it as rocket fuel? Do you use that claiming of that feeling to use that discomfort to help you move towards traction rather than distraction?
Brilliant. And I mean, look at you now. Your chiseled face and body. I mean, what a transformation. And it just starts with these beliefs. And as you said, I find that so fascinating, because so many people try to get us to control what we feel, how we feel, and to sort of fight it. But to just redirect it makes so much more sense to me. It's so powerful. And amazing work to not only be where you are today, but to have recognized that and be willing to share that as a story for people, because I mean, that's all it takes, and you can really transform your life. And as you said, it's not for everybody. Like, sure, some people, like, you're not shaming anybody, but you're somebody who's clearly in love with life, and you've made a decision that by being healthy and looking good and feeling good, you're going to be able to have and give more life and do the work that you're doing. So that's absolutely amazing. So Nir, a pivot that I wanted to make, and just a general thing to kind of bring it into a realistic place for me. So I would honestly say, I want to be your best student. Let's say I wanted to be your best student. And I think that my baseline prior to ever even being introduced to your work was like, okay, I'm a generally organized person. I have an assistant that helps me manage my calendar and my life. She's incredible. I'm great with technology. I'm open to using physical in the world to organize myself, whether it be whiteboards or planner. I literally created a planner that merges the physical with technology and a feedback loop, so that I understand how I'm performing, what's working, what's not. I mean, I've really been in this world and because as I said earlier, I fundamentally know and have experienced the difference between when I am distracted and when I'm not, and I have traction, positive traction toward what I want in my life. And yet still, I feel that there's this chunk missing for me to really become an expert at everything that you talk about. One of the things that you talk about is this idea of to-do lists and this idea of calendars. And and we can talk about that, but after I implemented that, I think I became at least twice as happy, like generally on a baseline level, like more at peace and content, and obviously more effective as well. And so to explain to people what I did, I basically sort of essentially threw away all of my complicated to-do lists. And I had this idea that freedom was white space on my calendar. The less things on my calendar, the better. And instead now my calendar is this incredibly filled out, color coordinated thing that has chunks of time for me to show up. I essentially now, just as you talk about, I show up to what my calendar I dictated I should show up to do. But I'm still struggling. And because it's like, I'm trying to find this balance between all the things I need to do and then showing up to my vision time on my calendar or my inbox time on my calendar, being like, well, yeah, where I need the to-do list. And so I'm missing something, and I'd love a little bit of like guidance here, because it's like, I still need the to-do list and it's vision time. Well, what should I focus on? And life just continues coming at me, right? I run 3 companies, you know, I have a podcast, like writing a book, by the way, my first book. Too much going on, too many projects. And I'm like, do I just cut all the projects like some people say and focus on one thing? Like, so how would you approach this if you were in my position?
Okay, so the first step is to cut yourself some slack, right?
You hear all the pressure.
Yes. That look, this is an iterative process. That you're never done being indistractable. I would say you're already indistractable. Why? You know, this is a word I made up, right? I coined the term indistractable, so I can define it any way I want. Being indistractable doesn't mean you never get distracted. Okay, I still get distracted from time to time, but here's the difference. An indistractable person knows why they got distracted and does something about it, whereas a distractible person keeps getting distracted by the same things again and again and again. There's a wonderful Paulo Coelho quote. He said, a mistake repeated more than once is a decision. A mistake repeated more than once is a decision. So look, if you make a mistake, you get distracted, no problem. Things change in your life. Life comes at you. It's okay. Distractions happen. But if you keep getting distracted by the same thing again and again, you have decided to be distractible. Whereas an indistractable person says, I know what you did there. I see why I got distracted, and I'm going to take steps today to prevent getting distracted tomorrow. So this is where it's about this holistic approach of using all 4 parts of the Indistractable model. We talked a little bit about internal triggers. We've got to have those ready. That's the most important thing. None of the other techniques work unless we know what we will do when we feel that internal trigger. That's the most important first step. The second step, which you talked about a little bit, is all about time boxing. It's all about making sure that we know what it is we want to do with our time. Because remember, we can't call something a distraction unless we know what we got distracted from. How do we do that? It starts with our values. Values are attributes of the person we want to become. Let me say that again. This is really important because it's another one of those terms like distraction. We think we know what it means, but we don't really. Values are attributes of the person you want to become. Values are not things you value. Okay, big difference. How do you know the difference between a value and something that you value? If it can be taken away from you. Okay, so money is something that can be taken away from you. That is not a value. That is something you value. Yes. Okay, as opposed to honesty, integrity, commitment, perseverance. Those are values. So what you need to do is to turn your values into time. Turn your values into time. You know, there's a reason that we talk about time with the same language, with the same exact words that we use to talk about money, right? We make money just like we make time. We spend money just like we spend time. We pay attention just like we pay with dollars and cents. But when it comes to our money, we're very stingy. Right? People will clip coupons and they'll debate whether they're going to buy a 99-cent app or they're going to split the check when they go out to lunch with a friend. We're super stingy with our money, but we're super liberal with our time. And I think it should be exactly the opposite. We should be generous with our money, because money you can always make more of, right? But I don't care if you're Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, it doesn't matter. You only have 24 hours in a day. You cannot make more time. We all get the same fixed amount of time every day. But you can always make more money. So be stingy with your time, but generous with your money. Now, by turning our values into time, what does that look like? We have what we call these 3 life domains. The 3 life domains are easy ways to categorize your values. So what I want you to do is to ask yourself, first and foremost, what are the values that you hold for yourself? You are at the center of these 3 life domains. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others, you can't make an impact on the world, you got to take care of yourself first. So that means, do you have time for rest in your calendar? If that's important to you, right? Physical health. We all know how important sleep is. We've been told to death, sleep is important. But how many of us have bedtimes, right? Like I
Yeah.
used to tell my daughter all the time, you have to go to bed on time. But I was a freaking hypocrite because I didn't have a
Hmm.
bedtime. So do you have that time in your schedule? Do you have time for if exercise is important to you? I'm not saying it has to be, but if it is important to you, is that on your calendar? If personal growth is important to you, if knowledge is important to you, do you have time to read, to take an online course, to do whatever it is that's important to you?
Yeah.
Put it on your calendar. By the way, I don't care what it is. It could be prayer. It could also be meditation or video games. It
Right.
doesn't matter to me
Right.
as long as it's what you want to do with your time according to your values. So put that in first, put that in your calendar. Then relationships. Okay. Part of the reason we have a loneliness epidemic in the industrialized world today is that the regular occasions that were held on our calendar have disappeared. As society became more and more
Mm.
secular, we know that fewer and fewer people go to church these days or some kind of religious institution, whether mosque or synagogue or whatever, or temple. Those regular occasions when we would see other people in our community disappeared.
Yeah.
But we have to bring that back. So whether it's your buddies, whether it's your kids, whether it's your spouse, whether it's whoever it is, you've got to have that place on your calendar fixed and protected for the people who are important to you in your life. Don't just give them the scraps of time that are left
Yes.
over. Then finally, the last domain is our work domain. And this is where people tend to start, but it's actually the last place,
Right,
right?
right.
First
This
we have to
was
take care of
huge for
ourselves.
me, by the way.
Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, because everything
Excellent.
was structured around what do my companies, my employees,
Right.
and I need to be doing for work first, and then do I have 20 minutes to go for a run? Maybe
That's right.
no.
It's like building a house by starting with the roof, right? You build a house by starting with the foundation. And the
Yeah.
foundation is you, right? You
Right.
have to take care of yourself first and your relationships first because you can take care of yourself and your work, but if the important people in your life are suffering, you're going to suffer too. Right?
Yeah.
Like if your significant other is yelling at, "Hey, how come you're not spending time with me too? Aren't I important? Why do I just get whatever scraps of time are left over?" You're going to have problems.
But it's very counterintuitive. It took me a long time and I overcame something massive because for me, I thought input of time and energy equals results. And I thought the more time and the more allocation toward the work, the better I'm going to perform and be happier in my life and have more results. But it's very counterintuitive because the moment I started taking care of myself, time in the morning for reading, time to go for the jog, time in the evening for learning, time on Wednesdays, every single Wednesday, men's night with the people that I care about most, my best friends, to talk about crypto and
Yes.
maybe have a beer and eat some Italian food, whatever it might be. And I started doing these things and my work filled in all the other areas only to the degree that I allowed it to. And all of a sudden, the constraints of that, I mean, incredible performance, incredible results. And I say that to really like recognize not only for myself to really anchor it in, but anyone listening and watching, I mean, that like that is counterintuitive. And we have been sort of, there's this this is like a Western lie, apparently. I think that's the best thing that I've seen so far is that the lie of work and workaholism and needing to put in more time creates more results is just something we have to flip. And the moment we
Yeah.
flip it, we start to realize like, whoa, we're actually more effective.
And you said a super important word, which is constraint. That we do better with constraints. And this is why many people resist time boxing, this practice of planning out how you want to spend your time, which, by the way, you can have huge swaths of time that are spent contemplating or reflecting or strategizing, right? You called
Yeah.
it white space, but that has to be scheduled. It's not
Has
going to
to be
just
scheduled.
happen, right? It's not going to magically appear. It
Right.
has to be held on your calendar. And so having that constraint, here's what happens. What will invariably happen when you sit down and do this exercise of you, your relationships, and then your work, you won't have enough time. I promise you. You'll look at your calendar and be like, I can't fit everything in. Exactly. That's the point. This is why schedules and calendars kick the ass of to-do lists. To-do lists are one of the worst things you can do for your productivity. Why? Because to-do lists have no constraints. You can add
Yeah.
more and more and more and more. And here's what's so terrible about to-do lists. And by the way, I'm not against writing things down. Writing things down, getting them out of your head and into an app, great idea. But if you don't put that time on your schedule, you're making a huge mistake. If you're running your life on a to-do list rather than your calendar, you've already lost. Because here's what happens. And I used to do this. I call this the tyranny of the to-do list. I used to be all about this. I would get home from work at the end of the day and I would say, I worked real hard today, but look at all the things on my to-do list I still didn't do.
Yeah.
Right? Look at
Terrible
all these
feeling.
tasks I didn't accomplish. And day after day, week after
Terrible.
week, month after month, you begin to think to yourself, well, I guess I'm not very good at time management. I guess there's something wrong with me. I guess I'm broken
Right.
somehow. And now we go back to that self-image. There's nothing wrong with you. It's so there's something wrong with this technique, this stupid to-do list method that we keep wedded to ourselves to, which is incomplete. It doesn't work unless you actually put that time on your schedule.
Yeah, I have been down that one. It's a dark place.
Yeah.
The never-ending to-do list is a recipe for misery, ultimately, especially if you're already a high-performing person, and more ideas come to you, and more tasks are given to you, and they keep getting added, and you get home, and whew, it's a
Yeah.
painful thing. So
One
to
thing I would add, though, real quick, though, is one of the aspects that we find really separates high performers and low performers is that work has two types. There's two types of work. We have what we
Mhm.
call reactive work and reflective work. Reactive work is reacting to emails, reacting to messages, reacting to your kids, reacting to meetings, all the day long,
Mm,
reacting to others' requests. Reflective work is the kind of work that can only be done without distraction, right? The strategizing, the planning, the thinking, for God's sakes, requires us to do those things without distraction. So one of the defining factors between high performers and low performers is that the low performers spend all day reacting. The
mhm,
high performers, they carve out at least some time in their day, in their work day, to work without distraction. Because if
mm,
you don't do that, you're going to run real fast in the wrong direction. So having that time, and this is directly addresses what you were saying before, you've
right,
got to have that time in your day, at least once a week, to sit down and ask yourself, okay, the week ahead, how do I spend my time in the week ahead so that I can live out my values, so I can turn my values into time? And once you make that schedule, it's fixed, right? You sit, this takes me
right.
15 minutes a week. I do it every single week, Sunday night. I look at the week that passed, and then I look at the week ahead, and I adjust that schedule. I say, okay, a little less time here, a little more time there. This is the kind of week I want to have, so that I know
Hmm.
in advance what the difference between traction and distraction is for every minute of my day. And then there's no regret, right? Regret happens
Yeah.
when we didn't spend our time the way we wanted to. But what happens with most folks is that they think they're going to spend their time according to what their to-do list says. And of course, that technique doesn't work at all. And then they feel miserable at the end of the week. They didn't get enough done. But when you decide in advance, this is how I want to spend my week, all you have to do is go forward, is just implement what you yourself said you were going to do.
Wow. One of the challenges I'm running into, and I'm using myself as a case study person, here just so we can be specific, because I know people will get a lot
Mm-hmm.
out of this. I've got the time boxes, and the day's going, and I'm trying to be, what was the opposite of reactive, the word you used for it?
Reactive as opposed to
And
reflective.
yes, reflective. So I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
create these spaces for reflection, for deep, sort of thinking
Mm-hmm.
and creativity, especially. But unfortunately, I get to that moment on my calendar, and it says brainstorming new product ideas. Okay, and then
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, I find myself not able to dedicate myself to that event on my calendar because the
Mm-hmm.
reactive things are still coming. So I play this game of like, okay, I do this one thing and then I come back to it. Or you know what I'll do? A call came up. I'll push that time box, that time block back 30 minutes. It'll be okay. I mean, it's a disaster, right? The next thing you know, I'm back in my old ways again. And
Yeah.
so I love the idea of a win or a positive thing to feel good about is simply to show up for what's on my calendar, not to check off the most number of things possible. I love that. I don't remember
Yeah.
exactly
That's
what
right.
section you
That's
say that, but it's pretty much that, right?
Exactly. So here's the big mind shift is that people don't put things in your calendar that you want to finish. Your goal is
Right.
to not finish anything. This is the problem with to-do lists. It's all about, little cute boxes that you get to check off that I finished this, I finished that. And you know what that leads to? It leads to us doing the easy stuff that gives us the little joy of, oh, look at all the things I finished, as opposed to the hard work that sometimes takes a long time to finish. So
Yeah.
the goal of a time box calendar is not to finish anything. I know it
That's
doesn't make sense.
that's
Wait,
I
how does that
know, but
make
it's
what?
transformative.
But here's the thing. The goal is to simply work on the task or whatever it is you're doing for as long as you said you would without distraction. That's the only thing you measure yourself by. Not did you finish, but did you work on it for as long as you said you would without distraction? Why is this so important? Studies find that the people who do this if you can just consistently work without distraction, you will get more done than the to-do list people. Right? Because life, achieving great things in life is about consistency over intensity. It's a
Yes.
consistently writing the book. It's consistently exercising in the gym. It's consistently putting in, being fully present with the people you love in your life. That's how we build good relationships, good health, good business. It's about consistent action. But if we are constantly scatterbrained and we do 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and then reacting to this and reacting to that, we never put in the focused work that's required to actually finish the stuff that's important. So
Yeah.
don't measure yourself by how much you finish. Measure yourself by whether you were able to work without distraction for as long as you said you would. But then you say, well, what if I never finish the task? Well, here's where we think of ourselves like scientists, not drill sergeants. So when you make a time box calendar, it's not about, okay, 8:15, do this, do that, do that, do that. It's not about, being a drill sergeant. It's about being a scientist. So after you go through a day, okay, you try and follow that schedule and you say, okay, where did I go off track? Where did I get distracted? And then you have an opportunity to do it again the next day. So a scientist, what does a scientist do? A scientist makes a hypothesis. That's your calendar, your schedule for the next day. You run an experiment and then you see the results. And then what do? You come up with a new hypothesis, run an experiment, see the results, come up with a new hypothesis, run an experiment, see the results. So every day gives you the opportunity to run a new experiment. So if you say to yourself, you know what, I wanted to write and I booked for myself 30 minutes and I didn't, I really wanted to make, if I had this deadline, I really need to do, 500 words in that period. And I can't do it in 30 minutes. Maybe I'm going to make that 45 or an hour. And so it forces you to kind of figure out how you're going to adjust your calendar for the day ahead. So once you make a time box calendar, you're not done, right? You don't just make a calendar once and it's fixed forever. You're adjusting it from day to day. What you're not
That's
doing,
what I'm doing
however,
wrong. I'm totally.
yeah, okay, good. We identified the source of the problem. What I don't want you to do is you don't change the calendar in the day. Once you make the plan for the day, you got to stick with it. But for the next day, hey, you can start over, right? You can move everything around and start over as long as it's intent. It's doing what you said you would do in the past, doing that thing now.
Yeah, I can see where I'm steering the wrong way here. Again, like I'll take it easy on myself. Yeah, yeah. But ultimately, I think it's showing up to the day. The day is kind of set up, and then all of a sudden, and I've set it up the week in advance with a sort of repeating system on Google Calendar, where it's like, well, that's the same thing at the same time every week, and so the calendar isn't changing much at all week to week. It's very small changes of just like, how do I fit in this meeting within these time boxes? And I think what I'm hearing is, would you recommend sort of like always refreshing the time boxes and the ways that you go about each week, each day?
Absolutely. So everybody, people have different cadences of work. So some people, like for example, for me, I pretty much know my calendar a week ahead. Right, my weeks don't change from week to week, but from week to week, somebody will say, "Hey, I want to meet with you, and next week." Okay, great. I put that in the calendar, and I'll adjust. If it's a time when I would have otherwise planned to write, okay, I'll put my writing time somewhere else. Or if I plan to be with my kid, okay, I'll move things around. Whatever the case might be. What you absolutely do not want to do, the rule you don't want to break, is once you set that calendar for the day, then you can't touch it. Right, because that defeats the whole purpose. Then you have to stick with it, even if you don't finish a task. Right, which can be one of the harder things to do. Is, man, I didn't finish. I want to just keep doing it. No, don't do it. Get on to the next task, but then for tomorrow, adjust your calendar accordingly. So, for example, if you really get into writing flow and you love it, then give yourself a little bit more time then for next time. Or if you have a big deadline, okay, well, maybe you do need a little bit more time so that you make sure you hit that deadline. But this is again, one of the big beefs I have with to-do lists is that to-do lists give you no feedback. And this is why we have what we call the planning fallacy. Studies have found that on average, people estimate a task to take them only a third as long as it actually takes. It takes you 3 times longer to finish a task on average than you think it will. But the reason we're so bad at estimating how long things will take us is because there's no feedback, right? We don't know how long things take us. Whereas when you keep a time box calendar, you see it. You said, okay, I planned 5 days this week to work on something for 45 minutes, and here's how much I got done. Well, if I want to accomplish that much or more, what do I need to do next week to make sure I have that time? Now we have a feedback loop. We understand how long things take us.
What is your personal system for keeping track, sort of the inbox of where all these so-called old to-dos go, so that you can then go, let me prioritize this, let me create an intent, and let me time box it? What is your personal system for that?
Yeah, so I'll have times in my calendar for like admin tasks, right? So like an hour, like we're refinancing a mortgage. So, okay, that's like lots of little paperwork I got to do. So I have time, but I could, maybe it's going to take me 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, but I've got an hour of time for admin. And so I'll keep all those little admin tasks to say, okay, that's when I do
Do
these
you put
little
them
5 minute
literally
tasks.
in the calendar? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
these are
They
the
can be in your
tasks I'm
calendar.
going to do. Huh.
They can even be in a to-do list app too, or a piece of paper. That's all fine. The point
Sure.
is not what I'm rallying against is not writing things down. That's a very good practice. Getting those
Yes.
things out of your head, putting them on a piece of paper or in an app. What I'm rallying against is leaving them there, right? If they just sit in an app that tells you to do this, to do that, to do this, and they don't have a place on your calendar, chances are they will stress you out and they won't get done.
So ultimately, these things that are sitting there need to get eliminated. It sounds like they either go on the calendar or they get eliminated. They're not important enough. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you can also use in conjunction with the to-do list. There's nothing wrong with using in conjunction with the to-do list, but make sure you
Sure.
have that time scheduled on your calendar.
Where do you think, in terms of when people first sort of begin to make these shifts, what's the one area that if they just kind of like got this first part right, would give them
Mm.
enough positive momentum to keep going in the right direction of becoming more and more indistractable?
It's like asking you to choose which one of your babies are your favorites. So,
I know.
so there's these four techniques, and you really do need to do one thing from each of these. We talked about two of
Hmm.
them in the internal trigger. So you need to have some tactics ready. You need to have some arrows in your quiver ready, so that when you feel that discomfort, what are you going to do? Very, very important. Then, making sure that you're turning your values into time, that you have that time in your time box calendar, so you know the difference between traction and distraction. Super important. We didn't talk about hacking back the external triggers. That's very important as well. All the pings and dings in your environment. And then finally, preventing distraction with packs can be very, very powerful technique as well. But I think a good place to start is to do one small thing from each task, from each of these four strategies. So, do you have one technique that you can use to deal with discomfort? There's all kinds of techniques. One of my favorite is the 10-minute rule. We can talk about if we have time as well. One thing that you will do when you feel those internal triggers, so that it prevents you from getting distracted. Maybe planning out one day of your week, right? You don't have to plan your entire 7-day calendar every week to start out. Start out by planning maybe one weekend, right?
Yeah.
What would the perfect weekend look like for you? How hard is that? Can you plan out one weekend? The vast majority of people out there have never felt the sublime pleasure of finishing a day and saying, that was exactly what I planned.
Wow.
It's the best, because then you get to come home. And that can include, by the way, I'm watching Netflix at the end of my day,
Yes.
but I get to
Yeah.
watch Netflix without guilt. Because in fact, if I put on my calendar, watch Netflix with my wife, that is exactly what I plan to do. That's traction. That's not distraction just because it's
Hmm.
entertainment. That's traction. And if I do anything else, that would be a distraction. So getting to the end of your day and saying, yep, I did exactly what I said I'm going to do with my time. I lived my life the way I said I'm going to live it, is just, it's just awesome. It's just the best
I
feeling.
know the feeling, because just even in this short time, in the last couple months that I've really been dedicated, the days in which, for me, success now is just sort of the way I think about it is showing up to the plan that I set for myself, and the feeling of the level of contentness at the end of the day versus before. It's like the to-do list is still a thing that exists. Don't get me wrong. As you said, it's good to still capture those things, as you said, but it's no longer my primary way of measuring if I'm performing or not. It's a completely different
Exactly.
reality.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think that one of the challenges that a lot of people have as well, I'm really curious your take on this. I am, for one, have been around what appear to be high performers. And these are some of the lies that I think we see in society tells us. I've been around a lot of high performers that are professional reactors. So
Mm.
imagine the modern CEO of a startup. He or she is just a machine. AirPods in, voice message, boom, send. Sally, schedule that for me. Do this for me. Oh, we need to Zoom. Let's just do it now. Let's make the deal. Let's go. Everything is just, and they're actually, ironically, I think they're getting a lot of pleasure out of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
some have told me that they're in a state of flow because they're sort of surrendering, but they're stepping into the challenge while it's there. There's an aspect that they sort of lose themselves and they find pleasure in that. And from the outside looking in, I do see performers, people, executives in particular, that appear to be getting so much done. But I really deeply wonder if you were to compare the best version of somebody following your methodology and that person who is ultimately getting the most done. You cited a study that looks at this. So do you think that's one of the lies and do you think that's one of the reasons why so many of us are reactors? Like what's going on
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not up to me or anyone else to tell you how to spend your time. So I want to cater to the people who say, I want this thing, but I'm
Right.
not doing it. Right. I want to exercise. I want to get in shape. I want to write that book. I want to be more productive at work. I want to have better relationships. Why aren't I doing it? Right. I know what to do, but I'm not doing it. If I know many of these startup types where they don't have a family, they don't want a family, they don't really care about their physical health, they just want to work. And I think
Right.
that's great. If that's what you want to do with your time, if you want to be in reactive mode all day long, if that's how you want to spend your time according to your values, hey, I'm not going to tell you not to. And frankly, if you go join an investment bank or a startup,
Yeah,
that's going to
that's
be
your
your life. You're
life.
going to be reactive mode for almost all of your day. And if that's your choice, that's totally fine. What I will say, I'll tell you, I'll give you a quick anecdote of someone who was always a thorn in my side. And every time I would give people this methodology around Indistractable, they would say, yeah, but Mark Andreessen, Mark Andreessen, right? The founder of
Yeah,
Netscape.
yeah.
He's one of the most famous VCs in the world right now. He is a co-founder of a firm called Andreessen Horowitz. And he wrote this article about how he doesn't schedule anything, right?
Correct.
Everything, he doesn't schedule any meetings. No, if you want to see me, you come now. That's it. Like, that's how I run my life. And every time I would talk about this Indistractable methodology, somebody would raise their hand and say, yeah, but what about Mark Andreessen? He's crazy successful and he doesn't schedule anything. And I didn't really know what to say. And then, joy of joys, he did an interview about a year ago and he said, I gave up on that
He's
methodology.
done,
And he
huh?
shared, he published his schedule. And it
Yeah.
is a beautifully time boxed calendar,
Wow.
exactly as I've been preaching for years, because it's something that, like, if you prioritize nothing but reactive work, if that's, like, for example, if you work in a call center, all you're doing is reactive work. Like, the phone rings,
Mm-hmm.
you pick it up, you deal with the customer. Great, that's your job. But very few of us have jobs that require only reactive work. We also need reflection. We also need time to think, let alone time to take care of ourselves, time to sleep, time to be with our families and friends. So if those things are important to you, and again, I'm not saying that they should be important to you, but if those are your values, you have got to make time for it. And so I was so thrilled to see that a person like Mark
I
Andreessen came
know.
around to the to my side of saying, look, he realized he needed time to think. He realizes
That's
he needed time
huge.
to strategize, because being reactive all day long, it's not sustainable. And frankly, you're not performing at your best. What we typically see when I see people like that is that they're running real fast. And sometimes they get lucky and they're running real fast in the right direction. More often than not, I see people who live their lives that way running real fast in the wrong direction because they haven't taken a step back to
Ooh.
say, wait a minute, am I doing the right stuff here? Am I living my life the way I want? Let
Mm-hmm.
alone, am I running my business the way I think it should be run?
Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly probably what happened to him. He probably just got to a point where it's like, am I actually working on the right thing? Do I have time and space to think? One of the greatest gifts ever given myself is 3 days every year to reflect. On those 3 days, it's almost like a macro representation of what you're talking about. Instead of just an hour or two in my week or day, I actually have it, by the way. I'm very aggressive with it. I would like to have like an hour and a half a day of just me vision time. And
Yeah.
it's been mostly working really well and I really enjoy it. But once a year at the end of the year it's like 3 days, fully off and just going deep on it. And it's the greatest
Beautiful.
gift you can ever give yourself. And
So true.
I mean, I owe it to people like you for really making me think about these things. So speaking of that, what is next for you, Nir? I mean, you've obviously been incredibly immersed in this idea in this space for quite a while. Before that was a different space, different book. What are you thinking about next?
So I'm still doing my thing, still writing and researching and consulting. I work with many companies on building habit forming products to help people build good habits in their lives. So I work with a lot of ed tech, fintech, health tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to keep writing and researching around this topic. I'm still not done. I really think that there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much hopelessness out there that people just think that their lives are manipulated by others all the time. And instead of saying, okay, well, what am I going to do to fight back? They just give up. So I'm really on a mission to try and help people become indistractable. And it's cool because I start seeing people describe themselves as indistractable. I titled the book Indistractable because it sounds like indestructible. It sounds like a superpower. And so I want people to call themselves this, right? If you've listened this far in the episode, you can call yourself indistractable. You're the kind of person who strives to do what they say they're going to do. You are indistractable. And so that's what I'm working on right now.
Beautiful. And you obviously have your books, which I will link to for people. They're phenomenal. And I saw you also work with people one-on-one, right? As well. That's an option. What are the best ways for people to work with you, to get in touch if they want to go deeper with everything?
Sure. So the best place to go is nirandfar.com. So Nir is like my first name, Nir, and far.com. And there's actually a complimentary workbook there. We had an 80-page workbook that was originally going to go into the final edition of the book, but it got too long. So we decided to pull it out and make it available for free, no strings attached. And that's at nirandfar.com. And whether you buy the book or not, get the workbook. It's a great compliment to you on your journey to becoming indistractable.
Nir, I know people are going to love the shit out of this episode. I know it because I talk about so many of these things all the time. And I also do these solo episodes where I go into the journey of all of this as I've discovered different resources, different tools. And when I discovered you, I even did, a whole episode on like my journey with it, how it's going, what's going on. And people absolutely loved it. So to get to hear it directly from you, I know people are going to be ecstatic. So and thank you for spending a little more time with me than we planned. I really, really appreciate this.
Oh, sure thing. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you, Nir.